Yes, good morning. Of course, this is the Western Standard. I'm your host, Nathan Giede, and we are here on Mountain Standard Time. Today, I'll be taking your questions and comments when it comes to the latest from Erin O'Toole, a bozo eruption from the Mount Vesuvius of the conservative movement. Yes, we have, of course, apparently a carbon tax that is not a carbon tax. So we're going to be doing commentary on that today. Please send in comments. We're not going to have a guest on for the first hour, so I am going to try and interact with the comments for as long as I can and ramble elsewise. Of course, later we have John Duncan, former Tory Whip, under Harper, and a minister in that government as well for, I believe, Indigenous Affairs, or as it's so called now. Remember to like the Western Standard on Facebook to be notified when we go live, and subscribe to our website in order to support us. We don't get any government cash. This isn't CBC, so please support us in any way you can. So now we go to my opening statement. We live in a time where what it means to be a conservative or a liberal or a Republican or a radical socialist, depending on where you're counting from, is in flux. There are people who believe progress is always good, that change is always a positive thing. Some of these people exist within the Tory movement, within the right wing around the world. And in Canada, we used to call these progressive conservatives. But there is another school of thought that says change is neither good nor bad in itself. It is the fruit it bears that has to be judged. And if the fruit it bears is bad or poisonous or wrong for the people and for the commonwealth, it must be rooted out, root and branch. It must be dismissed and cast away. Some people might think that that's a kind of extreme view, but the fact of the matter is that's the attitude we took to slavery and to fascism and a great deal of the oppression of women. So clearly, we do believe this value that if things are poisonous or wrong, we must get rid of them. With the advent of Erin O'Toole announcing a carbon tax that isn't a carbon tax, we must pause and ask ourselves, why is this the fruit of the party of which it was born? Why is this what's coming out of the conservative movement? Why would Mr. O'Toole betray the base in this way? Why is the leadership of the conservative movement completely divorced from the reality of its supporters, trying to court new voters in urban liberal areas, cities? Ultimately, such a move can be traced to the decisions of an elite few, particularly those political consultants and party apparatchiks who are the gatekeepers to the inner circles of the conservative movement. And they are the gatekeepers everywhere, let's be clear. The Democratic Party of the United States clearly has elite gatekeepers and consultants and people who make sure you get elected or make sure you don't. And we must understand that every political party in the world has these people who have essentially captured their movements. What they say goes. And if there is any resistance, even by an elected member, they will silence or censor them, dig up his or her past and have them forcibly exiled. This has happened many times. We've seen this many times in the Conservative Party of Canada, but it happens also in all the other parties here in Canada and even here out west. O'Toole's tax isn't the problem. It's the symptom, a symptom of a deep cancer with all the leadership circles of our country and indeed throughout the Western world. The common people are too stupid to govern themselves. And so their virtues, from the climate, the virus, the future, to gender, must be imposed upon them from above. Our elites believe that they are our messiahs. Well, I happen to ascribe to a different religion, which declares all men equal as well as fallible. And common sense also tells me that concentrated power always leads to corruption, whether it's in a family or in a kingdom as wide as ours. And within the conservative world, the only time we win or get the swing voters to come our way is when we play to our values and we campaign as what we are, Tories. When you campaign as conservatives, you win as conservatives. Erin, I have a message for you. You've been weighed, you've been measured, you've been found wanting. You don't reverse course on this carbon tax policy, let alone some of your virtue signaling, your base is going to stay home and your party is going to have the biggest loss that it's had since the Kim Campbell collapse right after Mulrooney way back in the 90s. And that means another liberal majority with all the tyrannical policies we're already suffering under. God's not dead. Neither is the conservative movement in this country. But in order to establish peace, order, and good government here at home or anywhere in Canada, the proper values must be met and they must be followed. Imposing unwanted, expensive, complicated policies from above is not the proper course, and it's going to cost the Conservatives the election. So that's where I kind of stand on this. Again, let's be clear what's happened here. So we have a current policy, right, from the Liberals. That's a carbon tax, and that carbon tax, of course, is imposed. It's a very, very rudimentary thing. It's not. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying, like, it's pretty simple. You impose a certain amount of tax on top of other items, particularly fuel, right? And then, of course, large emitters, whatever that means, because I'm guessing those categories are pretty all over the place. Of course, the point is that it's a pretty straightforward process. This used to cost this much. Now you imposed a tax. Now it's going to cost more, right? Very simple. So that's the Liberal system. And I don't agree with it, but one has to admit that the Liberal system is actually simpler than what's being proposed by Erin O'Toole. As far as I can tell, what's being proposed is essentially, well, we're going to take all that same revenue and maybe we'll even lower it. We'll lower the amount that you're paying that's more, but it's going to go into this savings account. So it's going to go into this, I don't know, green bucks savings account. So yet another thing you have to know your login for. Like, it wasn't bad enough trying to get online for EI. It wasn't bad enough to try and file for your child tax benefit. Now you have another online account through Revenue Canada or whatever, right, through Service Canada. And that's where all of your green bucks are. They're hiding in there somewhere. And you have to get them out of there, or you get a check in the mail. Maybe it'll be like GST for people who are below the poverty line, the GST check that gets sent in the mail. I'm not sure. Or the direct deposit, I guess. But I guess probably once a quarter. So probably about the same amount of times as GST happens. You get this sent your way and you spend your green bucks. I don't understand why this is the way we're doing this. I mean, there's all sorts of schemes around this. There's universal basic income ideas that follow this pattern. There's all sorts of redistributive techniques that follow this pattern. But it's very odd that Conservatives would try and make something that is both more complicated and less sensical than even the Liberals would, and still costs money and still costs the taxpayer, well, and the consumer, the person just at the pumps or doing whatever they're doing. It's just going to complicate their lives. I don't really understand why this is what's happened, but I guess in my opening statement, I tried to point that out. I think what's happened inside of the conservative movement is that it has been captured. I think that our elites in the party have been captured. I think that people are speaking out of the side of their mouths with things that they would have never believed before. I think this is an interesting phenomenon. I'm going to wax philosophical here for a moment. I think that, we always talk about this as conservatives, right? We say this all the time. You elect a guy to go to Ottawa and then suddenly he's representing Ottawa to you, right? This is an ongoing battle that we have inside of the conservative movement. And what I think happens here is that they're just so surrounded by the bubble in Ottawa, is that it's like trying to put an ice cube into a temperate glass of water. Like, it's going to melt. It's no longer going to be a separate ice cube. And even if that ice cube was differently colored, right, to signify that indeed you put this ice cube in there. So you would put blue dye in it, or, red dye or something to show that this ice cube was different. You had frozen it, put it aside, put it in there, and you're like, this is going to keep its consistency. Well, it's temperate water. And it's going to wear away at it. And what happens in Ottawa is that people all kind of melt into the same morass, and it just goes wrong. It just goes wrong. How can you keep your values? How can you keep your values when you're surrounded by non-stop denigration of conservative values? I'll never forget a story. This is an important story. I won't reveal what potential candidate this was. He did not win his riding, but I will tell you this story. So this was the 2015 election. He had been nominated, and it was Ontario. I'll give you that. I prefer to call it unterrible, but whatever. What happened was it was getting to be Pride Month or Pride Time, and he thought about putting up a rainbow flag in his constituent office. This was a bluish riding, a very, well, not very blue, but blue enough, and pretty socially conservative around it. But still, he submitted, even though he was kind of from there. His family was from there. He was a bit of a son of privilege, and he said, well, I mean, I'm thinking about putting up this pride flag in here. And it's like, I'm not saying there's anything for or against pride flags, but one of the people that was advising him just said, hey, by the way, maybe don't incite the base in this way. It's nothing wrong. Like, we all have relatives that are involved in this and whatever else, but the party still tries to stand with traditional values. Don't gaslight your own people. And he was like, well, if that's the kind of party we have, maybe we should get different members. And that's exactly the problem, isn't it? It's not about intolerance, hatred, or any of that. That's not an endorsement of any of those things. But it's a fundamental point of just as maybe, we're not probably going to have a lot of, there's not going to be a lot of symbolism around Palestinian liberation at most festivals that involve the synagogue. Likewise, here inside of this movement, more traditionalists are found, more socially conservative people are found. This is just a fact of life. I think anybody from any walk of life who isn't just trying to gaslight, isn't just trying to take false offense, would be completely on side with that reality. They all understand that that's how it is. And yet, somebody who was going to represent this riding thought to themselves, no, you know what? I'm going to be one better than my own people, and I'm going to virtue signal, and I'm going to show them how to be better Canadians and better people, despite the fact that obviously there was no pandemic or epidemic of hatred, intolerance, or bullying in this area. This wasn't taking a stand on anything. This was trying to show alignment with something that had no connection really to the values around that area, and to try and score political points. It wasn't about empathy. It wasn't about solidarity. It wasn't about love. And so I think that we need to be very honest with ourselves about this. This happens with us all the time. The people that we're electing are getting to be influenced by the people around them in Ottawa. And we need to understand that the people in the party in Ottawa really, like, they could work for the Liberals. They could work for the NDP. They are not social conservatives for the most part. The people who are in charge, the higher ups of the apparatchiks of the party, they have everything in common with everybody else who's in all the other neighborhoods of Ottawa and have liberal values, socially liberal values, fiscally pretty conservative, because obviously a bureaucratic town, so they like their rents, they like getting their money, right? It lets the housing market stay rather stable, and they really enjoy having a constant stream of money from the rest of us. But their values, socially speaking, are quite liberal, and you just live in that long enough, unless you're in a pretty tight community that's going to keep you informed of a kind of commonsensical way of looking at things, and that you're here to represent people. This isn't about you. You're not important. It's the people you represent are important. If that humility isn't being thrown at you all the time, I'm not sure what will happen. We're going to try and go to some of the comments now and just kind of look around and see what people are saying. I think that one of the big things that needs to come to the fore here is that Erin O'Toole has really misstepped here. He's really misstepped here, and he's gonna lose. He's gonna lose the base if he doesn't correct course on this pretty quickly. We're in big trouble, and I think people are going to stay at home on election day, and that election could be tomorrow, right? It could be very soon because the budget's coming. It's probably going to fail. And we're not sure whether we're going to have a May or a fall election. Basically, the Liberals are just biding their time, right? They're just seeing whether or not they're going to have enough people vaccinated, and whether or not they're up in the polls or down in the polls. And that was something that, of course, Stephen Harper tried to get us away from with fixed election dates. But fixed election dates haven't really worked for us in Canada because we're not a republic. We have a parliamentary democracy, and you can dissolve a parliament at any time. Even a majority government can dissolve its own parliament at any time, right? If there was a no confidence vote against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau back before the minority government that we have now, he could have been dismissed as prime minister, or his government could have fallen. Right? His own cabinet could have been undermined by his own people. That's been rare in Canada, but this happens in other parliamentary democracies, particularly in Australia and in Britain. So we has lost the base. Thank you. I'm sorry, I used the wrong tense there. I apologize for that. But it is exactly that. What are we going to do if our party doesn't seem to be if our party doesn't seem to be listening to us. I see some comments there. We're talking about separatism and rather sovereignty. Sovereigntism. Is it sovereigntism? How would you say that? I'll let Terry correct me on that one again. The thing is that I'm going to be completely candid with all of you. Where do I stand on the sovereignty question? I want a better deal from Ottawa, and I want it come hell or high water. So whatever way I have to get that deal outside of outright violence is whatever I'm kind of willing to do. I would prefer, if I'm allowed to go into this whole topic, I would prefer to see the borders of Canada not change. That is to say, its external borders. I would like Canada to remain a whole country. I would like to see its internal borders change. That's where I stand on that. I think that, I mean, I'm from British Columbia. I'm broadcasting you live from, we call it the northern capital of British Columbia. And yeah, Prince George is a pretty big town up here in northern BC. But let me tell you, we feel ignored all the time. I would be happy to see, for that matter, the diocesan lines. I know that's sounding a little rad trad on my part, but the fact of the matter is that if you look at the diocesan map of Canada, that is to say how the church divides Canada, you'll find very quickly that Canada could actually be about like 46 or 50, kind of like the States. It'd be all these different subsections, but all the major centers are also separated from the rest of us. So those major centers are governed by themselves and they don't affect the rest of us. So suddenly Toronto and Hamilton don't rule Ontario. And suddenly Vancouver doesn't rule all of British Columbia and Calgary doesn't rule all of Alberta. And all of a sudden people can feel much more at home in their own home, right? They feel that they have more control. So that's a theory. We'll bring that slide up another day. We'll talk about it more, but let's get back into the comments here. People again are talking about, they're talking about actually dismissing O'Toole. I see a comment there from Pamela. They're talking about, demand. Okay, we Conservatives need to go en masse to our MPs. Nice use of en masse like that, and demand they stand against O'Toole. This is the thing. Let's talk about this a little bit. So we live in a parliamentary democracy, right? We don't live in a republic. So what's ironic is that in the last 30 years, more presidents have been impeached. So that is to say, essentially a confidence vote, right, by the Congress in the United States. More presidents have been impeached than prime ministers losing on a confidence ballot inside of their own caucus in Canada. And that's weird. That's weird because it takes nothing to dismiss a prime minister. It takes nothing. Any MP from any party could stand up and say, I no longer have confidence in this government. I believe that the government must either the entire government must fall or a new cabinet and a new prime minister must be appointed, must be sought. And that's it. You don't have to have an election. Indeed, I mean, I'm not trying to give the Liberals ideas of how to win, but I think that Justin Trudeau is their biggest liability. Of course, he's their biggest asset, but he's also their biggest liability. He's actually a lot like Trump in this respect, right? Like Trump was the Republican Party. You were voting yes or no on Trump, right, in the last U.S. election. And so it's the same thing with Justin Trudeau. Do you believe in Justin Trudeau or not? If you don't believe in Justin Trudeau, you'll vote for just about anybody else. And I think that's one of the reasons why Erin's doing what he's doing, right? Let's be honest with ourselves. And then the other thing that's happening there is that when it comes to the prime minister, like I said, anybody can dismiss a prime minister who's another elected MP if they stand up and say, I have no confidence in this government. And then everybody else in the room says, you know what? Neither do I. That's it. Prime minister's gone. That's it. Could be anybody else. I mean, at this point, obviously, Christina Freeland is far more competent than he is. And that's not saying a lot, obviously. But I don't understand why the Liberals haven't even thrown him out already. Like, they should use the parliamentary procedures to try and find a better leader because he is their liability. If they find a better leader, they could live in government for a very long time. I think it is still kind of risky for them. But now with what Erin's done, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have one little speck of confidence that she gets away with everything. Look, Corey, I completely agree. Nobody actually, believes in that guy outside of whoever he's lying to at the time. But he's in charge for now. Though I guess his puppet masters must have a field day with the rest of us dealing with him. The way to choose party leaders is to have the MP select him. American-style leadership races we have are marketing exercise and popularity contests. Well, that's coming from a show favorite. We've had Mr. Clare on this show. He has some clear things to say to people who want to take our rights away, particularly our rights to our guns and our firearms and our heritage as a freeborn people that is both armed and able to provide for itself. I agree. I agree that we have gone wrong when it comes to the leadership contest here. Like, here we are as conservatives. We're what, 4 years from the last leadership contest? I'm looking at my producer here because he was in both of them. 4 years. We have 4 years, 2017, and then what, last year, right? Yeah. So we're at 4 years. It's 2021. So 4 years ago was the replacement of Stephen Harper that saw Scheer get elected and Trost come in fourth, I believe, and Maxime Bernier finished second. Erin O'Toole was third. And here we are. Here we are again, right? We're in another leadership crisis right before an election. This style of selecting our leadership isn't working. It's not working. We have to find a better way forward. And I think part of the reason it's not working is, even though we have this, I've always thought this was funny about us conservatives. So we hate the idea of vote reform, but our ballot for selecting leaders is the most complicated ballot in like the Western world. Like, it's just, it has, every place is worth 100 points and no ballot is not discounted. And we got to make sure that, every single proportion, how you carry a riding, how many points is it worth? Like, it's just, it's pretty funny. I just think it's kind of ironic. We have, conservatives in Canada like, no, first past the post is the way we do things. But as soon as we go into internal party structure, it is the most complicated voting system in the world, with multiple ballots, multiple countings, right? It's funny. But the point is that here we are, and we're in a leadership crisis. We have we have a guy who's literally telling us that he's going to do the exact same thing that the Liberals are going to do, and already have done, indeed. And it's going to be more complicated, more costly, and less efficient. So it's not even going to be an improvement on what's already terrorizing us at the pumps. I don't know. I don't know how that's going to go. I don't think it's going to go well. I think that's the election right there. Like, that's it. It's over. I still think we should get out and vote. But then again, even there, how do you vote for a party that's not holding your values, in any sense of the word? I think that maybe you have to kind of talk to your MP directly. I think that was a really good comment, that we have to talk to the MPs directly and tell them, like, they need to push back. They need to push back against what's coming, against this policy. This policy isn't working. We need to do something better. I think ultimately, as well, we have to start finding a way to get our own say in things. I think one of the things that we've learned through COVID is that it doesn't matter whether you're right wing or left wing. You can be a tyrant pretty quickly. And so if we look at what's happened in British Columbia and in Alberta, and the harsh lockdowns in Ontario as well as Quebec, and technically speaking, Quebec is ruled by a right of center government right now. And then, of course, what's happened in Manitoba, and then out there all the way into the Maritimes, where they basically, it was interesting what they did in the Maritimes, right? I had a buddy, I should tell you this. So I had a buddy, he's a lawyer. He had to go fly out into Newfoundland, and he needed to get inside there. Well, getting into Newfoundland was like trying to get into North Korea during COVID. Like, you couldn't get there. It couldn't happen. You needed to talk to literally the provincial health officer directly, or at least the office, like the officer's office, right, to the people in charge, and get on to the island. Like, you couldn't get to Newfoundland without literally a permission slip, all but a passport from their provincial health authority. And so I don't agree with that whatsoever. At the same time, it appears that the Maritimes are now past everything, and they're going to continue to keep their border mostly closed, everything west of New Brunswick. And they're just going to kind of party with themselves. They're going to have a good time. They're going to have a summer, apparently. They're not in the same boat as we are when it comes to these rolling restrictions. I call them rolling blackouts of your fun, And so what's that going to look like? What's that going to look like? I don't know. Coming back to just what's happened with the lockdown here in British Columbia and everywhere else, I think that people just don't understand how easy it is to to slip into tyranny. And I mean, anybody who has kids, I'm unmarried. I'm hoping to be married soon. But I'm unmarried and I have no children. No exes and no alimony. I got lucky on that count for my age group. But anybody who has kids knows that there's being a good parent, there's being a bad parent. And I think that we all know the moments where, and, you know, whatever, when I was substitute teaching, that sort of thing, there's being a good, you know, there's been moments where I was a bad teacher, right? And I was not as kind or as generous as I could have been to you know, a particular set of classes or whatever. And to the same point, right? If you're a parent, you know that sometimes that you can be a bad parent, right? We can all do that. We all sin, right? We all make mistakes. And I think that the thing is that when it comes to our politicians, like, one, their sins have more consequences, that they affect more people all at once. And two, if by the very nature of your job, you're not allowed to doubt yourself, or you're not, and like doubts about your leadership must be thrown out at all times, and you must just make decisions and live with the consequences. You know, we're going to take that hill. I don't care how many men it costs me. You know, you can get into a loop. You got that lack of humility. You have that lack of insight, that lack of reality. And you get lost. You get lost. We're going to take some more comments here. I see that, another friend of the show, Chris Velasco. It's like, what do you think of Frank Caputo running for Tory leadership based in Kamloops? This is an interesting point. I can't tell what level of government this is. Is this at... Okay, so a conservative nomination, so that makes sense. I mean, I think that the big thing is going to be that, again, it does come down to a test of values, right? I think that's the time we live in, is like, where do your values stand? If you have the right values, then I think that, you know, hopefully people will support you and you will get elected. But let's actually be clear about this. Let's talk a little bit about how primaries work in Canada. That's an American term, of course, right? That's an American term to use the word primaries. But if we're talking about nomination battles, what happens in Canada, and this gets really, really dark really fast, especially within the Conservative Party. I'm sorry, I'm letting all the cats out of the bag today. But the fact of the matter is that, one, again, to get into the nomination race, you have to have a signature from the leader. I believe you still have to have a signature from the leader to get on, or that you can be canceled at any time, right? So then the other thing is that, of course, people are going to go through your social media and everything else. Now, nobody wants a neo-Nazi elected to parliament. Yes, we get that. But simultaneously, even if you do have just stronger views, say around abortion or around euthanasia and that sort of thing, that's another way you could get filtered out. But let's be clear, they won't tell you that. And then finally, right, you get into the nomination battle, and the party is really happy that you're just helping them generate memberships, because that's what you have to do. You sell memberships so that people can vote for you in the nomination race. That's the name of the game. And if you have enough money, or if you've got a buddy who kind of does some political consulting or knows how to do strategy and that sort of thing, you call them up, and I don't know if you put them on the books or not, or you kind of hide where you're putting that money and whatever. And that's kind of how you try to win the nomination base. But you need to understand that the party has favorites. It absolutely has people it prefers in every single nomination base. And there are times where the party interferes. There are times where the party sends people in to ensure that guy gets elected and not that one. And sometimes it's that girl or that guy or that guy or that girl. It doesn't matter. It's not based on gender, sex, race, or anything else. It's that the party has its preferences. It has its politically correct understanding of things, and it wants those people elected. And it does send in fixers to make that happen. Let's go to some more comments here. My dad is very sick. I can't go see him without a 2-week quarantine. Yeah, there's a lot of people who did not get to see their elders in their last days. And I think I don't know if there are words that are appropriate to this show to express how disgusting that is. People should have been able to see their parents as they passed. There was no comfort. Of course, in my faith, prayers as you pass on are very important. Very important. It's a sacrament, actually, inside of our faith. And so the fact that wasn't happening, the fact that people were were left without their last rites and without access to even their families and without that comfort. It's completely, it's inexcusable. It's inexcusable. I have no words for it. We're going to go to some more comments at the bottom here and just kind of see. There's been some new comments as we got on there. Yeah, it got to go. Unless they change it, will be the first time I won't vote in a federal election. I have been a member of the Conservative Party for a very long time, but I am so furious with how they're making so many bad decisions. Shelley, look, I completely get it there. I completely understand. That definitely appeals to me as well, in the sense that like I don't really know what to say about it. Like I feel like we see this. So here's a theory for you. What happened was the Conservative Party made a gamble. They made a guess, right? So the people who run the Conservative Party, the elites inside of it, they made a gamble. They said, look, Conservatives have nowhere else to go. So the base can't leave. So what we're going to do is we're going to pivot and we're going to try and appeal to a bunch of new voters and a bunch of liberal voters that maybe are tired of the liberals or understand that there's been mistakes. So we're going to make these policy changes to try and soften the Conservative message, to bring new people into the party, or at least get them to vote for us this coming election in 2021. And we're going to leave. We're going to like just hope that the social conservatives and the fiscal conservatives and everybody else, maybe the more libertarian conservatives or the more, conservatives who want like freedom of expression, that sort of thing. We'll let them just simmer in the pot because they can't go anywhere because there's nowhere for them to go. And we're going to bring in some new people, get a winning coalition and take majority government. And maybe they'll who knows who's going to, who knows what's going to happen. Like we all know that parties get elected and then their platform completely changes and they don't follow the promises they made. But I hesitate to say that that's a winning strategy because I don't think it is. I don't think you can just throw the base under the bus and be like, oh, this is going to be fine. Everything's going to be grand. We're gonna get everybody in there, and don't worry, we'll get a winning coalition, and then we'll rule like actual conservatives. Well, you didn't campaign as conservatives. And because you didn't campaign as conservatives, you got a bunch of people to get on side with you. Well, that's not good. That's not good. So we're going to go to a few more comments here. I think we've got a comment from John here. The tyranny is creeping. Bombard your MPs with emails, snail mail, and phone calls. Snail mail gets to people. This is important. I carry stamps with me in my wallet all the time. I know. I'm only 31. I come from a generation that literally saw everybody go from mail to email. But I do carry stamps with me at all times. And sometimes you just need to. You need to be able to send a letter. I think actually we got another comment here. This is from Isabel. She is making the point that you talked about the lockdowns in the Maritimes. What do you think about the travel restrictions coming in your province? Oh boy. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I'm kind of vain. Sometimes I kind of play with my hair. Don't worry about it. It's a big deal. All right. Whatever. What do I think about the lockdown in my province? Oh my goodness. I don't know what I'm going to say if an RCMP officer actually tries to pull me over and say, "Hey, why just come along, little buddy. Like we're doing a random stop." I don't want to call our Mounties, or as I always prefer to call them, the Queen's Cowboys and Cowgirl. I don't want to call them anything, but I like, do I get to call them the Gestapo at that point? Like, I mean, shout out to all of our members who serve and are putting their lives on the line every day. All the caveats. Okay, I'm not trying to be dismissive. I have friends who are cops. I don't want to get into an adversarial relationship with the Mounties, and I mean really the membership, because I mean, let's be clear that the institution itself, just like anything else, the white shirts upstairs, if they hate me, like I don't really care if they hate me, because I mean, they hate anybody who gets in their way. But to the members themselves, I respect you, and I don't want to get into an adversarial relationship with you. But honestly, like I can't even understand how would you enforce it? How could you in good conscience pull somebody over? Right? Like, how could you do it? Like, it'd be one thing if it was literally as simple as the guy who thinks that, I should go and hug every single old person while infected with COVID in order to, I don't know, expedite things. That like that person, okay, but how would you know that? And how would you do that without a warrant, without just cause, and without all those things? Like even in that terrible scenario where somebody is literally trying to give COVID to people on purpose, you would still need to prove your case or have reasonable cause for search and seizure, right? And for arrest. If you don't have it, you don't have it. And that's the nature of our justice system. So I can't, that is what it is. You must produce the body, right? It's habeas corpus. You must produce the body. You must produce the evidence that warrants this person being held against their will. And if you don't have the evidence, you can't. You just can't. Random stops, non-essential travel. Define non-essential travel. I mean, the other day somebody said, like Bonnie Henry wants us all to stay in our neighborhood. And I'm like, well, I'm going to ride my motorbike. Pretty socially distanced from other people. I got a visor on. I got a helmet on. I mean, not exactly breathing on people. But I'm going for a ride on my motorbike. Deal with it. And I need to go to church and do whatever. And, I went and prayed in front of church because the churches are still closed. And I had to go pick up some stuff. And I don't know what we're doing. It makes no sense. And these rolling lockdowns and the random stops, like I think I might just tell that member, sir, ma'am, I'm sorry, but I'm like, unless you want me to take your badge number and you want me to go to the media, like, no offense to anybody, like, I'm not even trying to just use my platform here to get some intro. It's like, I'm not, I don't want to threaten you personally. I'm not here to dox you or whatever, but it's like, look, I'm going to tell people that, that the RCMP pulled me over. Right. And, and that's going to happen. And that's life. And I hope you guys can live with the consequences of that. Not in any violent sense, in a sense of like, can you wake up with yourself in the morning and be like, yeah, that's fine. It's fine. Please don't. Just don't do it. Go bust somebody for drugs. Go do a Timmy's run. I don't know. My producer is out of the room for just a moment, so I'm just going to read you some of the comments we have here. It's clear O'Toole and his staff have decided Canada needs a Conservative Party that is also progressive. I'm surprised no one has ever thought of this before. Winky face. That comes to us, of course, from Aaron Ekman, another friend of the show. He's been on the show with us a couple of times. He comes on Thursdays. Me, him, and Stuart Parker debate the issues of the day. Aaron, of course, is being facetious there. We of course have a long legacy of progressive conservatism in Canada, and let's be clear, some of that progressive conservatism, like the most libertarian person in Canada, is still pretty happy that there's going to be a publicly funded emergency room when they get into a car accident. Okay, we conservatives have conceded this point. The idea that there being some fundamental level of basic care, that's a point that's conceded. On the question of climate change, etc., the issue becomes more so still whether one wants to believe that climate change is an existential threat or it's just a natural process. The fact of the matter is that no amount of taxation is going to fix it. No amount of taxation. Because ultimately, for me, the way I understand it is that really you just get to pick your theocracy. I'm a good, pro-democrat kind of guy. I want there to be democracy, right? Like I want people to be able to vote, choose their leaders, that sort of thing. But and there's the comment there. Yeah, there it is. It's clear O'Toole and his staff have decided Canada needs a Conservative Party that is also progressive. I'm surprised no one has ever thought of that before. I think the thing is that we conservatives, there are moments to be progressive. For example, say when we want healthcare and that sort of thing, which was at the behest of the CCF, now the NDP, and Tommy Douglas. But still, at a fundamental level, you can't pay your way to heaven. That was the idea of the Reformation, right? You can't pay your way to heaven. And I say that as a Roman Catholic. Can't pay your way to heaven. You have to have a sincere sense of belief, and you have to work for it in a real way. Well, if climate change is an existential threat, you can't pay your way to heaven. Okay? So no amount of taxation is going to fix it. You need to make a sustainable, better future, and it needs to be for everyone. And that's a place of justice for everyone. Every person, from the least of these to the greatest of these, they all deserve a stake in the country. And if your system is going to penalize, right, the least of these people who are the worst, right, they're in the worst conditions, the worst economic conditions. They're the ones living hand to mouth. And you're going to come up with an economic system to get us all to a brighter future that hurts them. I'm not going to back that. That's not justice. That's slavery. That's evil. And so we're not doing that. And so I think that that's the thing with what Erin O'Toole's conceded here is he's like, well, I guess we can do the slavery thing. That's okay. I'm not doing the slavery thing. I'm not endorsing that. Carbon tax is slavery. The idea that we're going to tax our way to a better tomorrow. I'm not doing that. That's nonsense. We've got some more comments here from a couple of different things. Let's see. The officer of the next Prime Minister of Canada. It's quite the statement. What is that? Is either your values and concern represent the popular culture within the party base, but also the popular culture of society. If you're not willing to stand up for those values, then you are not a conservative. I agree. We have to stand up for the values of conservatism, which in the end, a lot of people think it's about small government, that sort of thing. I'm not saying it isn't, but I think I've said it on the show before, and I'll be very clear now again. I am an anti-austerity conservative. And what that means is every time conservatives only talk about cut, one, they're giving away all the votes that they could ever give away, because there are people in the civil service that are interested in voting conservative. But the idea that they're all just going to lose their jobs is not fun. But guess what? The frontline workers are usually more conservative than the managers are, because they're all apparatchiks of the Liberal Party, as we all know. So cut the management. You get rid of two birds, one stone. You got rid of a bunch of Liberal voters that were untouchable, and you gave a whole bunch. You take half of their salaries and you put it to frontline workers, and then people get better services, and you actually saved a bunch of money. How about that? Really not rocket science. If you want to fix the civil service, do that. Simplify the tax code. Take all the CRA people, put them into Indigenous affairs. Fix it. Put them on the water problems. Figure it out. Like, it's not a big deal. So, but no, you need to stand with your values. You need to stand with your values. And part of that is, it certainly is at least peace, order, and good government. How small that government is up for debate. But peace, order, and good government, and certainly out of the way. It doesn't need to be in our toilets. It doesn't need to be in our yards. It doesn't need to be in our air. It can be away from those things. Okay, let's see. Erin had another comment down there, but there was, and of course the Albertan has always weighed into these things. Yeah, 42 of 44 police departments in Ontario refused to enforce some of Doug Ford's most draconian restrictions. Time to reestablish the provincial police force in BC. I'm totally in favor of there being a provincial police force in BC. Of course, I'm also sometimes kind of crazy and like, hey, why not the night watchman? Who watches the watchman? Whatever. We'll get into questions of policing another time. But I appreciate that Erin mentioned that. And God bless all of you police departments that did stand up for the people of Canada and the people of Ontario, as unterrible as it can be sometimes. Good for you guys. You did the right thing there. I hope that your federal brothers and sisters follow your example and refuse to impose restrictions that are clearly just tyranny. We'll go to the Albertan. He likes to give me his hot takes every couple of shows here. It should also be said the government is very inefficient at providing charity help to the needy. Provide profits do that much more efficiently. Wow, maybe if I could speak, that would be helpful. And when we allow government to administer the daily needs of people, there is a loss of efficiency at every layer of bureaucracy. This is not a question. It's not a question. I completely agree. Of course, this is the fundamental problem of what we do with government in anything, right? And I think that we have to understand this. So for those of you who are kind of Christian social democrats in the crowd, and there's a lot of us, a lot of people who kind of feel like, well, I have my faith. My faith's very important to me, and it tells me to care about other people. And so now I want to find a way to implement that through government policy. Again, I'm not saying there isn't a place for, some fundamental basic needs. But I think perhaps the simplest way to look at it is like this. Your neighbor needs your help, not your tax dollars. They need your help personally. And if you want to do the right thing, it's you give your help personally to people. You don't hide it in things. You give it to them personally. And there does need to be a basic level of care for everyone. But the greatest thing you can do for your neighbor is help them clean up their yard, help them wash their car, take care of their kids, be a part of the neighborhood, right? Be one in your community. And let them administer to you as well in that way, right? This mutual bond of charity, right? And we need to know our neighbors, and we need to do the things that will get us there. So that I think is kind of the key point when we look at when you look at how should government act in these things. I completely agree that the nonprofits have to do the detail stuff. You know what government's really good at? And that's not even that good at it, honestly. But the thing that the government does, you know, like we built the railroad in Canada. That worked. You know, we won the war, right? We were able to build tanks and airplanes and all sorts of stuff. And then the spin-off industries that comes off of those central items, right? Like whether you build a big dam or you build a pipeline, right? The spin-off industries from all that, having cheap power, having all these machines that do metal forming, right? We were building planes for the war with this, but now we're going to build beavers and all this other stuff, and de Havilland is going to happen and all that stuff. And of course, we built the Mosquito for the war. Like that's the way it's supposed to work. So government is the one that can take ultimate liability on things in a way that nobody else can, because government is basically, well, governments can fail for sure. And we might have a failing government if this inflation gets any more out of control. But the point that I'm trying to drive home here is that if you have at least a responsible government, it understands that you have to make these public sacrifices of public dollars for these big ticket items that then have spin-off effects that multiply in huge ways. Having cheap power in British Columbia is a big deal. Having access to water in our country is a big deal. Having, you know, the infrastructure we have when it comes to our airports and that sort of thing is mostly pretty high quality. Those investments then have multiplying effects, right? And if you can link your business up to what the government's doing in that way, or like the infrastructure they're building, that's when you definitely start raking in things and making a good living for yourself and a good living for the people who work with you and for your family. And so that's the way I think to look at what government can do. And then when you go to the charitable question, the charity question, and helping with people who are in dire straits, the simplest way to understand that is the government does a good job of building that infrastructure, but then the details have to be done by people on the ground. And honestly, it's not only cheaper, it's far more efficient, and ultimately you can't pay someone enough to love somebody. I think that's one of the things we need to talk about when it comes to medical care. I'm not saying I don't want expert doctors, but you cannot pay someone enough to love somebody else. So can't start change from the top. We can only do it from the bottom up. This is exactly the problem of what's gone on with this latest announcement from Mr. O'Toole. I don't think this is, if this had been a party platform thing, let's say there was a more progressive conservative riding association that had decided to put this forward. Like, hey, we got this idea. Let's talk about finding a way to redistribute wealth a little bit, especially for people who are hard up, and to do it through a carbon tax system or something. That would have been worthy of debate at the national council level and between all the constit associations, all of them talking to each other, the presidents. Maybe there could have been some roundtables, a bunch of Zoom meetings, town hall meetings, and then that could have been discussed. I'm not in favor of there being more levies on our fuel. I'm not, but at least the question could be asked. And one of the things that we really try to do on this show, as all of you know, is we try to have just freedom of expression on this show, right? We have two rules, right? No denying the Holocaust, no swearing. Those are our rules. And outside of that, we talk to anybody and everybody from all across the spectrum about all sorts of ideas. And so that's the point. If that had been the way this was done when it came to Mr. O'Toole's announcement, then maybe there would be a leg to stand on. But as it stands right now, as far as I can tell, this really was kind of schemed up in a back room, and that's going to have some trouble. That's going to cause some problems because people feel imposed upon. This is the whole reason people have a problem with our Constitution, is that it looks like it was kind of written on a kitchen table at midnight. And coincidentally, it was, right? This is the problem. People feel really, really alienated by a Constitution that in its first line tells us that God and the rule of law are the rule of the day. And then in the second line says, oh, by the way, you can limit all these fundamental freedoms just at a whim, as you can demonstrate whatever the Supreme Court says and tosses a coin. And then finally you get through your fundamental freedoms and everything else. And I, even as a status Indian, have to tell you that I have problems with the idea that there's a constitutional protection around some of those Aboriginal rights, because where does that stop and where does it end? Can I, as an Aboriginal person, I don't know, stand in front of the Trans-Canada Highway and just stop all the traffic from Kamloops to Toronto and be like, all right, like until I get what I want, like But at the same time, we also believe in freedom of assembly and people demonstrating what they feel is wrong, and telling people that we need to protest this, we need to do this. So it's always intention. I'm not saying that there's a simple answer to this. It's always intention. But the point that I'm trying to drive home here is that people feel imposed upon when it comes to this latest announcement from Mr. O'Toole. And we Canadians do feel like a lot of things happen above us without us being consulted. And then it comes down to us, from on high, the high priests of our culture, the high priests of our government come down and say, this is how things are going to be. And we're like, well, I'm a king. It's like, well, I didn't vote for you. I didn't vote for that. I didn't vote for climate change policy from Erin O'Toole. I wonder if Erin O'Toole is doing this on purpose so people vote for Trudeau so he gets a majority. I don't know. Maybe he has, I don't know. Does Trudeau have a company to have stocks invested in? I don't know. They say pay this carbon tax. What is the money used for? What have they done to help us so-called climate change so fat with our money? I live in British Columbia. We've been paying for the sins of climate change for a really long time. What that means, I have no idea. The Carbon Trust in BC was woefully managed. As I recall, I believe it was a place that the BC Liberal Party kept putting its friends. There was a lot of cash sloshing around in it. What it was for, how it worked. It didn't turn into like the Heritage Fund. I know a lot of you guys are from Alberta, and it did not turn into the Heritage Fund. It didn't. So BC doesn't have any investment in there that's going to sustain us through thick and thin or whatever. So I don't really know what this was about. In fact, I got to ask you guys for your forgiveness because I should probably be less ignorant about that. So maybe we'll try and bring on a guest to tell us more about the Carbon Trust and that sort of thing. The Albertan has something to say about Danielle Smith for some reason. I'm not sure what this is all about. I didn't even mention Danielle Smith. God love her, but I didn't really mention anything about her. Okay, Danielle Smith for Alberta Premier President. Of course, we're not a republic, but all right. She betrayed the people for what he crossed the floor, killed the Wild Rose Party. You know what? Again, we're gonna let people debate these things in the comments as they will. I will say this. 2 points. One. We all remember Belinda Stronach crossing the floor as well. And of course, that was the end of the love affair of John McCain and Belinda Stronach. But the other thing that we remember is that Winston Churchill crossed the floor, I think, no less than 5 times on different votes. And that wasn't just voting against his party or for his party. It was he literally changed parties about 4 or 5 times. And so the man who basically won World War II, as we all know, right? Fight them on the beaches, fight them in the air, right? This man, whom still remains, I think, the greatest Briton and remains, of course, an inspiration. I don't know why people are trying to cancel him. It's absolute nonsense. But we have to remember that he too crossed the floor. So crossing the floor in parliamentary tradition is a real thing. And actually, to the point of crossing the floor, in the congressional system, you're in a semicircle, right? You're in a semicircle. Here, I should put my hands here. And in the parliamentary system, you're like this. So crossing the floor in the parliamentary system is a serious sign of something. Whereas in the congressional system, like in the United States, you can just kind of wander around. And Winston Churchill actually made this point. He said, the reason we don't sit in a semicircle is you can actually see who believes in what. They don't just kind of hop seats as they slowly move to another part of the political spectrum. We have kind of one more comment here from Erin. We'll click on that. Whose benefits more from O'Toole's shift, Maxime Bernier or Jay Hill? I don't know. I guess we're back to the 90s. I mean, everything's the 90s again, didn't it? Wasn't that a joke like not that long ago when the Jays were in the playoffs and that sort of thing? Like, it's like, we're back to the 90s. I guess we never left. We never left the reform and the Canadian Alliance and the PCs and. Ultimately, I think we're back to the same problem again, and the reason the conservative consensus is wobbling. I'm not saying it's shattered yet, but it's wobbling. I think it's wobbling, one, because of a lack of strong leadership. I think Stephen Harper provided strong leadership. I have criticisms of that government the further and further away I get away from it, but I will not doubt the sincerity and the strength of Stephen Harper. I think that was part of it. And I think the other thing that's gone wrong is that ultimately, you have to remember what you're dealing with when you come to the Liberal Party of Canada. I like calling it an empire of lies. Same descriptor we used to use for the Soviet Union, because that really is basically my opinion. That they are an empire of lies, and they're certainly blue bloods, right? They own everything. They have people everywhere. Foreign service, half of them are all Liberal Party members. They got people in the universities. They got people in media. They got everybody. Okay, they got all the people. And the thing is that they are an empire of lies. It's about favors. It's about wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's like, well, don't report on my sin. I won't report on yours. And they have an agenda, and they're kind of like the Democrats in the United States in that sense. That like they're more competent people, to use the words of a very odious person who tweeted that out when he endorsed Joe Biden. They're not more competent people. They're just better networked. They're better connected. They're not even smarter people necessarily, but they're just better connected. And so the thing is that if you're looking at what's happening to the conservative movement in Canada, it's that it just isn't as well connected. It's small town mayors. It's not big town mayors. It's the third, fourth, fifth Senate seat of a province, not the first, not the first three. And that's just how it is. They just don't have the institutional background to hold on to it in the same way. That doesn't mean that the Conservative Party is doomed or doesn't have a way forward. But the reason that these other parties are coming to the fore is that they're looking for another vehicle, because the vehicle they have right now doesn't seem to be listening to them. And people are angry, and they're afraid, and they want their jobs, and they just want an alternative. So hopefully the Conservative Party can be that alternative to the Liberal Party of Canada. But if they can't figure that out, we're going to be into big trouble. We're going to take one or two more comments here, and then we are going to get John Duncan on in just a moment, and I'll introduce him at that point. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, somebody's trying to give Jay Hill the old thumbs up. That's great. I mean, Jay Hill was my former MP. It's funny that you had Bob Zimmer's riding, which has a very long name that I cannot remember the entire name of. And of course, we have to start thinking about regionality. There's another comment from William Scott there. Jay Hill is from the West. Bernier is from the East. I will not be voting for Bernier. This is kind of maybe a place to sort of end this whole question of what's happened with the carbon tax, what's happening with the lockdowns, and finally what's happening with even the questions of sovereignty or separatism, or just trying to get a fair deal from Ottawa. I think we need to understand that Canada is very regionally divided, and I'm not saying that I don't want people to work more closely within their regions to do the things that need to be done. Okay, let's be clear. If we don't help each other, no one's going to help us. Right? We got to do this. But at the same time, we have to be careful. We have to be careful, because I think if we do get too much into a kind of tribal mentality, it's not just a matter of like, there's going to be violence in the street and that sort of thing. I mean, there could be, but I think that more properly speaking, the problem becomes that if you get stuck in your regional mentality too far, the collaboration necessary to keep this nation state going is gonna go sideways, and that's a problem, because I promise you that there are people who are very interested in taking over this country by force or by propaganda. I would name the Chinese for sure. They're definitely they're very excited at the prospect that Canada has weak pro-China friendly governments. That's very good for them. And I think that while the United States might never invade Canada, I do think that a certain liberal, elitist, technocratic mentality from the United States, which already got in here under Pearson and Trudeau. We all know that because we all read George Grant's book, right? Of course we did. The point is that Canada's been suffering from that consensus for a long time. That's what's really wrong with the Liberal Party. We can't get into that right now. But the point is that kind of mentality is going to sneak in here, and we are going to live under the same kind of regimes as California and New York and and for that matter Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. Like, I don't want to live in lockdown forever. And so we have to be very careful, right? It's that old rule. Either your army is on your property or somebody else's is. You're going to get an army. You always have an army, but it's either your army or someone else's. And we have to be careful with that. What that looks like when it comes to Canada kind of redrawing its borders, I don't know. But we will talk about that another time. So we are going to pivot now to having John Duncan, the former whip for the Tory caucus, while Stephen Harper was still prime minister, and of course, a Minister of what is now called Indigenous Affairs, though at the time I believe it was still called Aboriginal Affairs. John, welcome to the program. I think we have you frozen for just a moment there. We'll,
Dave?
can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, very good.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you. You're a little bit jittery right now, but I'm sure it'll smoothen out in a moment. Well, thank you for coming on to the program. And why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in politics and where it took you over the course of your life? How did everything start for you, John?
Well, it's a long story because it started a long time ago. 1991, I met Preston Manning, came to the community. We filled a very large hall. I was on the local party executive, and it was all kind of brand new to me. I'd never been involved in federal politics before. When I actually listened to what Preston had to say, I ended up leading him in my vehicle to his next connection because I was so impressed. And then I volunteered for the nomination committee because I knew that the message was a good message. The reform message of the day was a great message. I interviewed multiple people in terms of would you be a good candidate? Would you run for candidacy? My number one target turned his captain's chair around and said, "No, I'm not going, but you should." And so I took it as a serious exercise. If you can think back to 1992, that was the year of the Charlottetown referendum. And I took that as my cue to travel to all of the outlying communities. It's a huge riding, the north half of Vancouver Island, and it took a good part of the coast in from Gibson's all the way up Bella Coola. So I had a Reform Air Force Cessna 210 that I could get around in. Spent my weekends doing that. I had to be a very helpful boss at the time, and I thought I'm not going to win this thing, but I'm going to put all of my energy into it. And I was quite committed for a year. We kept expecting an election. We had the Kim Campbell era, and she waited until the last possible date in '93. So I've been campaigning for over a year. A lot of things changed. I knew, like the Charlottetown referendum changed everything in British Columbia, and in 1993 elected more Reform MPs in BC than in Alberta. Of course, we had a few more MPs as well, but that first wave, 52 Western members of Parliament from the Reform Party. It was an interesting time, a very interesting time, and we were not that well received when we got to Ottawa, putting it simply.
And I mean, up until recently, can you hear me, John?
I'm having trouble picking you up, Nathan.
He's breaking up.
I understand.
You're breaking up, yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll try and work our way through that. If we have to use the chat for the questions, we can, in order to facilitate that. But I think that just as kind of a pivot there, Jay Hill and of course Dick Harris were both my MPs for a really long time here for Prince George. Obviously, the reform movement stayed, and then of course when it became the conservative movement, it stayed for a really long time in British Columbia. Do you think that makes British Columbia different, that it had such a strong reform background before it began its before the conservative movement got going?
Well, British Columbia was instrumental in the reform movement, and of course, if you go by reform, it led to a lot of fundamental change in Canadian politics, including the Stephen Harper government, of course. It was a government, a very good government, in my opinion. British Columbia and Quebec had a lot in common in the lead up to 1993. All those constitutional conventions that were held under Mulroney, for example, BC and Quebec were actually closer together on their provincial authority and in terms of fighting off the spending power of the federal government. Those were really strong unifying messages for Canada at the time, and I think we've a lot of that recently, but that's a fascinating look at the Canadian political scene, and I believe to this day that we actually have a lot in common with Quebec in terms of how this is our relationship with the federal government, and we're both far away in for different reasons. Geographically, British Columbia, I think most British Columbians view themselves as British Columbians first and Canadians second, and I'm not sure that's everywhere. It probably applies more in the West and in Atlantic Canada than elsewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Not sure where you
what
want.
was well, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about day one from there and moving forward. What was on your mind as the key piece of the agenda when your caucus came together? Because it was a flood of an election, right? It was a rise, it was a big reform wave. What was the first thing on your mind as a new member of parliament? What did you want to accomplish, and what did your colleagues want to accomplish?
Well, I think all of us had a strong feeling that the things that we aimed on were things that we wanted to create considerable change in Ottawa. So each of us had our own specialty. A lot of people had an agricultural background, and so what did that lead to? Eventually, it led to disposing of the Western Canada Wheat Board, a long-standing grievance from Western Canada, a big positive. In my case, I got involved a lot in natural resources from my forestry background, and I got involved a lot on First Nation issues, Aboriginal issues, now Indigenous issues, and that's sort of where I landed. For some time, I was on trade file in opposition because of softwood lumber. So I think we all pursued some of the big issues, the big items that had affected us in our ridings, in our province, and I mean, in terms of let's just say in terms of policy, in terms of Aboriginal policy, eventually I was the minister, correct? So a lot of what I was doing in 13 years of being an opposition member of parliament were policies that were considered radical. Most of those policies have now been adopted by government. They're in legislation and they're considered mainstream. How easy, we all forget how difficult some of those changes were at the time. One of the things you might want to ask me is, what are the things that changed in Ottawa due to my presence? What am I most kind of proud of? And
Yeah. What about it?
I'm most proud. The thing I'm most proud of, nobody is on nobody's radar. The Premier of the Northwest Territories and I met in Inuvik in 1994. He was a new minted MLA, and I was a newly minted Reform Member of Parliament. And I went out of my way to meet the local MLA. His first words to me were, "What's a Reform MP doing out here?" And I explained my strong interest in the North and in Indigenous affairs. He's Christian, and so we had a coming together. Well, many years later, I was minister. He was the premier. We knew each other. What was huge on their agenda, their number one priority was to see the same independence from the federal government that Yukon had established. It's called devolution. To achieve that, the two of us decided that's a common goal. We both want to do it. And we went full steam ahead, and we came to fruition and was finalized in March of 2013. Huge for North Territories because the federal government was making all their land use decisions up until then. Now they make all land use decisions. For example, they have many other things that came with it. That was probably the most important change.
I think that that's exactly something to kind of jump off into a little bit more. Is that, I mean, I'm a status Indian. I was adopted out of my community and out of my culture, but I do feel a strong connection to it in a kind of same sort of heritage sense that the children of immigrants do, maybe in Canada, sort of thing. And I feel that at times when I see some of the protests and that sort of thing, like, I understand bad things happened, and I understand there's still things today that need to be fixed. But while you were minister, what did you find to be the most effective method of meeting the needs of First Nations people in Canada? What was the agitation worth it, or did it come easier? Did you get more flies with honey, sort of thing, right? Did it come easier to make friends with a friendlier disposition? What worked on your end, both in opposition and then when you were the minister? And what about your dealings? How did that go?
Well, I think we had a vehicle called the First Nations Land Management option, which allowed First Nations or empowered First Nations, for example, to make land use decisions in a business-like way on their own communities, That only applied to 13 First Nations across the country. And the bureaucracy insisted, right from the minister down, that that could not be expanded because there was essentially a veto from the 13 that were part of it, and they're feeling the feeling is you cannot get them to change because they believe there's a fixed budget and they don't want to share it any more widely. So I didn't take. I thought, oh, this is a great thing, and there's a demand for it. So I basically wrote to the chair of the group, chief from West Bank at the time, and asked for his permission to expand it. When I got a letter back almost immediately saying, yes, please proceed, I took it and waved it in front of all the bureaucrats that were telling me that this could never happen, and we expanded it. So that was one way to become much more engaged with a lot of progressive First Nations. They wanted that change. They've now achieved it. I don't know what the number is now, but I'm sure it's in excess of 30 across the country, maybe 40. And there was a lot of demand for infrastructure. We did a lot, on water systems. We actually had some of the more expensive projects, arsenic in the water, things like that we fixed. There were very, very fixes. As you know, a lot of the communities where the residences are quite far apart, and to pipe all of that, especially in the Canadian Shield, it took a lot of money, a lot of resources. There was so many areas we could collaborate on, everything from education to water systems to housing. I mean, housing's an ongoing issue. It's happening actually in all communities at this point. But the one, there's another piece of legislation which was standardizing the financial reporting, and there was quite a strong from the rank and file. I think the progressive chiefs were not opposed to standardizing financial reporting, annual reporting, but there was strong demand from it from a lot of the rank and file. So we collaborated with the accounting profession, the national organization. We created a standard format that became legislated, and so we put forward and passed the First Nations transparency legislation. We did that early enough that there was a full year of reporting prior to the current administration getting in. So there was a full year of reporting, and there was a lot of good results from that. Standard reporting, everybody knew you couldn't go auditor shopping the same way they were doing it before to get a positive audit. It was standardized. Unfortunately, that legislation is not being enforced, not being, it's simply being ignored at this point.
And that's something that's actually of great concern to me personally. I feel that this is a place where it's that subtle racism of lowered expectations. Somehow us Aboriginals aren't supposed to keep track of our books or something. Like, I don't I don't understand. Like, and the idea that somehow hiding the finances will make things better for people, as you said, the rank and file or the leadership. That lack of accountability. We don't say this about anywhere else. Why did the Liberals decide to suppress this piece of legislation? I don't understand.
Well, I think the Assembly of First Nations was opposed to it for their own political reasons, and the incoming government and the Assembly of First Nations made a deal, and so the deal is we're not going to enforce the legislation. It was that simple. There was a lot of complaints for a while. The fact it wasn't being enforced, I think the Canadian Taxpayers Federation took the government to court over it, but it's now years, and the legislation's still on the books, but it has to wait for another day, I think.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, makes sense in the sense that clearly a deal was made. So, I mean, throughout your time in Harper's government, you would have gotten to observe obviously the leader very closely. You got to be a part of cabinet, obviously, and some of the votes that were taken throughout that time. People have different ideas about what it is to be a whip. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what it means to be a party whip? Is it as kind of sinister as people imagine it to be, or as we've seen on Netflix or whatever, or is it much more a matter of just being in good connection with your colleagues and trying to convince them that this is the right thing to do? How did you feel in your role?
Well, it's probably the most interesting thing I've ever done in many ways. I mean, I was actually probably well placed simply because I was from far away, so travel. I knew everything about travel. Nobody could pull over my eyes in terms of travel because the whip approves travel. The whip assigns seating. The whip assigns committee responsibilities. The whip's responsible for discipline. The whip's responsible for getting people in the right place at the right time, especially for votes and in committee. I had all of that, having been there for, I think, near on 17 years, and 13 of those in opposition, and having in a variety of roles, and never having really stepped in the glue. So, and I think, you can't do a job, like you can't do the House Leader's job or you can't do the whip's job unless you have the confidence of the Prime Minister in government. And, I've been a supporter from the time he was exploring his level for running for the leadership. So we knew each other well, and I think he had no about me, and I think the caucus recognized that was the case, so they weren't reaching over my head, which they're prone to do when they're unhappy with the whip's decision. So I was the whip for 2.5 years going into the 2015 election. And we knew that was going to be a tough election. When caucus knows there's a tough election coming up, they can become very unrested. And really, we did very well. We did very well as a caucus. And I found that to be a very rewarding time. Yeah, I don't know what else.
My producer is prompt here. To remind me to ask you about losing your seat and winning it again. I forgot to ask that earlier.
Oh, yeah, that's not many people do that actually. I think I was the only conservative to be defeated by an NDPer in the 2006 election, because that's the year we were in government under Stephen Harper. And I became the only conservative to defeat an NDP incumbent in 2008, 30 months later. So it was an interesting time. I had to make a decision. I've been there 13 years. I spent a very long time making sure that I was positioning myself to get reelected. And I had a very good team. I know once we did postmortems back in Ottawa after the 2008 election, and I gave my presentation about all the things that we had done. I mean, it was a textbook in terms of the voter identification and the get out the vote and the messaging, how we did all that, and of course the commitment that I made, I think, was a full-time commitment. I was already 55, was already receiving some pension, and therefore I could dedicate myself for a full year ahead of that was a minority parliament, so we felt the election so far away. I dedicated myself for a full year to getting reelected, and I shadowed the sitting member of parliament, and made her very uncomfortable by so doing. But that's politics.
That is no. I mean, you're going to be
It's the big
scrutinized. Right?
leagues.
Yeah, you're going to be scrutinized. Right? That's how it is. What? Maybe we can talk a little bit then about one of the. I think that with the leader and with Harper, just I mean, obviously various myths surround Harper, down to what he ate and how he dressed, right? There's all these myths within the conservative movement that surround the man. You obviously were in very close proximity to him for many years. What did you observe about Stephen Harper?
I think you're asking me about Stephen Harper. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Oh, you were breaking up. I apologize.
Understood.
Well, he's a funny guy. That's not well known, I don't think, or it's not well appreciated. He's a very funny guy, and he's as straight as they come in terms of conversation. You don't have to speculate or guess where it's coming from. I always said, when I worked in industry, I always took the position that I have authority, and I'm going to use my authority until somebody tells me that I'm abusing, or not abusing, but that I've reached beyond my authority. And it served me very well. I behaved the same way in Ottawa, and there's people who I think would say that the prime minister, they say it about a lot of leaders, that they were controlled. I never felt controlled at all. I knew that I had very few boundaries. As long as I did what, in my judgment, was the right things, and well, maybe I suffer from good judgment, but I appreciated the Prime Minister, and I believe in the modern era that no one has done a better job. We went through the 2008 financial crisis so well. Of course, we had a great finance minister in Jim Flaherty. He was such a great loss when we lost him when he passed. But you know, Joe Oliver was a great finance minister after Jim Flaherty as well. I think we had a lot of talent and a lot of very good people, and we ran a very good government. And I was comforted by the fact that I knew that my leader, the Prime Minister, was someone who had Canada's interest at first. That was first on his priorities, and he was not somebody who could be bought. Nobody could buy Stephen Harper, and you know, money was not his motivator. He wanted to do the best things that he could for Canada. We lifted more people out of poverty, and we did more for income distribution across the board than any government pretends that that's what motivates them. If there's one thing that we probably didn't do very well, is we didn't explain always everything we were accomplishing. Our list of accomplishments was huge.
Yeah, that's been widely
every.
Yeah, no, that's been widely acknowledged by. I'm trying to remember what the title of that book is, but there was some political analytics done on the Harper government, and it was considered to be the best kept promises, the government that kept the best promises the most often out of any government, and probably it might have been as long as a century, but certainly 30 years within Canada. Something that was always a bit of a difficulty for for the Harper government was communications, and one of the places where those communications broke down was, as you pointed out, a lot of people think of Harper as a stiff kind of guy and whatever else, but were those moments of discipline within caucus, again, as whip, as somebody who was right there, did you think that those moments of discipline were warranted? Did you think that those moments where either someone was even dismissed or lost their spot in caucus, or was censored or shuffled out of cabinet, did you feel like they had earned their scorn from the leader?
I never questioned any of those judgments, and I mean, I was actually removed after 2.5 years as the Aboriginal Affairs Minister, went into the penalty box for 6 months and came back as the whip. I question why that happened, but I wouldn't question the judgment of the Prime Minister, because he was operating from the information he was given by his trusted advisor, and it turned out that maybe wasn't appropriate. But yeah, I don't recall any changes that I questioned. And we did have a very strange situation with Belinda Stronach when she came to the party, and
yes,
stayed for a while, and then went to the Liberals. And actually, we weren't government. That was the Paul Martin government, short-lived. I was displaced as the international trade critic by Belinda because that was her price for admission, and I was okay with it because I'd been off to natural resources working on the soft lumber dispute, which was the biggest project at the time to try and get us back to square one with the U.S. in terms of our lumber trade. It was really hurting a lot of communities, a lot of producers, and a lot of jobs at the time. And it didn't get fixed until we formed government in 2000. Stephen Harper took a strong interest, and he got fixed what hadn't for many years. That's our check mark in terms of accomplishments of Stephen Harper.
I think that's something that is also important to people to know is that I had a conversation once with actually Ryan Leaf, a former member of Parliament, Ryan Leaf, and I recall that he explained to me in no uncertain terms what happened when there were.
You locked up on me. Ryan Leaf explained. I did serve with Ryan, and I enjoyed having such a strong character in our caucus. You've absolutely frozen on me, by the way. So I didn't get the question, but yeah, Ryan came to us, and I think it was at a time when we were doing a lot in the north. I was the minister, and the senator from Yukon, Dan Lang, was a conservative. The only member of parliament from was right, the conservative, and that gave us a lot of synergy to allow us to work with the premier, and it was the Yukon party, which was a conservative friendly party. We did a lot in Yukon on their power grid and infrastructure projects, and on some of the Indigenous agreements. We took a strong personal interest, and I know the Prime Minister was doing tours of the North on an annual basis, and those were very important. I mean, it was a week every year in the North, and those were some of our, that gave us a real insight into the issues, and I was able to part of all of that. Of course, those weren't the only times I was in the North. Of course, I was in the North a lot in that frame, flying on the big on the new Hercules, and in some of the King Airs and planes like that. Basically, everything in everywhere except Yukon is you have to fly, and it's most Canadians don't get there.
Nope.
They're very fortunate.
Nope.
I feel fortunate to, almost every community in the North.
Yeah, it's a wild land out there. I just about stayed in the Yukon when I visited for a brief time, back in 2018 with all my school time friends. It was it is a mystical place, and even my time up in Churchill, the North is different. The North is still a wild land, still a lot of freedom, and just a strong draw. But I think as we kind of pivot into some of those questions, let's talk a little bit about development in Northern Canada and what that looks like. Obviously, again, with your background, with your direct connection to having been the minister of well, at the time it was still called Indian Affairs, but and changed to Aboriginal Affairs, now Indigenous Affairs. It's had a lot of name changes. But how do you see things progressing in this realm? Like, this is obviously kind of the reality of Canada, you know?
Yeah, well, I was thinking I had two name changes in the short time I was the minister, because it covered the portion of two parliaments. How do I see things changing? Well, I think the it's now well established that for a lot of big projects in Canada, in order to have those projects go ahead, you have to have Indigenous participation, and at times you're going to have Indigenous leadership, and so that's no longer an issue, and that's a positive. You have some very progressive leadership now, not just at the political level, but you have like the major coalitions and things like that, where they are our Indigenous groups are inviting participation from industry. They're popular avenues for industry to participate with the Indigenous communities. We're going to see more and more of that, and I think we're going to, if we're going to have pipelines and other big projects in Canada anymore, that's how they have to happen, and that's increasingly and abundantly clear to people of every walk of life and ethnicity. So I'm actually a half full guy. I think we're going to be in a much better place. I believe we're going to be in a much better place. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what to say beyond that. I don't know what to say. I don't. The fact that you and I are talking, I don't. You have a First Nations background. You're a status Indian under the Indian Act. My children are status Indians. That was never really an issue when I was in Parliament, and I never used them as a shield or a sword. We're all just people.
No.
And Canada is a blessed country. We need to be able to afford all the things that, if we want to continue to have jobs, if we want to continue to be a strong economic force in the world, we have to develop what's available to us, and there's so much that's available, and it's not pursued because of in my mind, because of opposition that's noisy, and it's really hurt the common person It's hurt our workforce. It's hurt on all kinds of fronts. And you know what we've lost is hard to measure, but Canada has every opportunity to be in front of the pack, not lagging the pack in terms of jobs and the economy and our social, uh, uh, our social welfare system, and our leadership in the world. I mean, we talked about things like the military, but I'm very proud of what we accomplished for the military while we were government as well. And some very important things. You know, the Prime Minister Harper got us out of Afghanistan. It's a lot easier to get involved in something like that than it is to get out.
It is.
And we got out, and he also was instrumental in getting us great aircraft. We used to rely for heavy lift on rentals. It was a gong show, and so by purchasing, I call them Globe Masters, the big I think C-17, CF-17s. Those are tremendous airplanes. We never had them until our government, and it meant we didn't have to go begging when we wanted to respond to emergency in Haiti or Asia or wherever things happened, and there was a need for our national defense resources to get there. And yeah, the list of accomplishments of the Harper government, I mean, they're huge, and I don't want to negate the huge influence that Preston Manning had, and I was very loyal to all our leaders. Stockwell Day, we had interim leaders in John Reynolds and Deborah Gray. You know, I've been there for a lot of political events, and one built on another. We wouldn't have had a conservative government in 2006 if we hadn't showed up as the third party in 1993 and acquitted ourselves very well going forward from there. Yeah, we had some visionary people.
Yeah, I remember Deborah Gray. Yeah, I remember Deborah Gray's bit with Rick Mercer. It's feels like such a throwback, but these things like it maybe that's something that has changed in kind of the politics of Canada, and I don't think Harper was the harbinger of it. But it even our current administration and everything else that's happening is that it seems like things are pretty cagey at times, and there isn't kind of the friendliness across the aisle. I know things could get heated in Parliament. Did you ever feel like it had gotten too heated, or was there still the spirit of Parliament, the spirit of parliamentarians in it?
Oh, I think there was a spirit of parliamentarians largely there the largest part of the time. There was individuals who got into it from time to time, and you know, there's a great leveling effect when your peers don't actually support something that you said or done. It's there's probably more influence there than there would be from somebody like the whip talking to them on the same front.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, I have no feel for the current parliament. They don't even sit in the same place. I mean, the House of Commons has been moved to temporary quarters, which bring new definition to the word temporary, because I'm sure they'll be there for 10 or more years. Emphasis on the more, because projects in Ottawa do take a long time, traditionally. And those iconic buildings, they have a lot of changes to bring them up to date. I haven't been
I
there
think
to see the new
something that has gotten to me about that whole equation is that in our mother parliament in England, at Westminster, they sit on benches. They are a nuclear power. They have a large army and a large, of course, the famous Navy and Air Force. They're a strong nation, an ancient nation. And yet, for all of their pomp and circumstance, their parliamentarians sit on benches, not at desks, right? I always thought that renovating Parliament in Canada, all they had to do was clear out the desks and put in benches, but they chose to just expand and put in more desks. I don't know if you have an opinion on that or not, as a former whip.
I have noticed that what you're talking about. I mean, if you watch the British Parliament, yeah, the benches look. I mean, one of the great things about it, about having your own desk, is you don't have to worry about where you're going to be sitting. You don't have to cart everything with you, because there's quite a bit of room when you lift the lid on your desk. And you always know where the people from the other parties are as well. That would be a real cultural shock for me to have to deal with benches. But the good thing about benches is, if the parliamentarians changes, which ours is prone to do, you don't have to go through a major renovation each time. So from a practical standpoint, I can see some benefits there. It depends on the footprint. I think we still have quite a bit of space per person in the Canadian House of Commons, but if it gets much bigger, then I think they may have to change. Maybe you can have a front row of desks, and the rest of the rows can be benches.
As we come to the close here, obviously the Conservative Party is in flux in Canada. There's a lot of moving parts all around the world. Are things going to get more populist? Are things going to get back to the establishment? Is the old consensus going to win out, or is a new consensus going to happen? The realignment. I'm not interested necessarily in a perfect interpretation of all that. I'm more interested in, if someone were to come to you, John, and say, I'm thinking about running for Parliament. What's the best advice you could give me? Or even if the leader were to call you up today and say, hey, I'm facing some difficulties. What's the best advice you could give me? What would that advice be?
Well, traditionally, I think you would say people vote for the leader, the party, and then the local candidate. But I don't believe that's true everywhere. And so, if run for Parliament, as long as they're a strong advocate and known to be a strong advocate or a strong voice in their own community or communities, then I think it can work, and it often does. People ask me about running on Vancouver Island, which is where I live, for the Conservatives. And if they don't have a history with political activism, then I tell them simply they social with a constituency organization at the local level and get involved, get to know the local executive and the party members as much as possible, and volunteer at some level. I mean, even since there's things that have to be done, if you're not prepared to do that, then what are you prepared to do? I mean, being a member of parliament's a full-time job. It more than fully occupies you. It's not a 40-hour, more like it. If you're really doing your job, probably a 70-hour-a-week job with a lot of travel. I met flight attendants who spent less hours in a year in the air than I did when I was even in opposition. I was on airplanes so much. Well, it's a long way away. Yeah, they have to at least do that first step. If somebody's got a high profile in a community or communities already, then maybe that's less important, but they still want to make sure that they know the local political organization. Not know them would be unfair. Yeah, I think. Yeah, it's not a science. This is politics and art.
Yeah. You got to dress for the job you want, right? Like you got to show up for the job you want.
You do. And one thing that Preston Manning always said that's always resonated with is, if you're not constantly trying to make your tent bigger, you're inevitably shrinking. And that's a lesson that every person aspiring to be in the political arena needs to take to heart. You're not just talking with conservatives or traditional conservative voters. You need to be reaching out to everyone. You need to represent everyone possible. I mean, it's not possible in some cases, but that, I think, was what served me so well. I mean, this is not known as the home of conservatism, Vancouver Island. To have represented a riding on Vancouver Island for 19 years was not the easiest thing in the world to accomplish. Right now, there isn't a single conservative on Vancouver Island. We believe that will change. I believe it'll change this election, whenever this election is.
Well, that is a bold prediction, but we do wish it all the best. Again, I've been speaking with John Duncan, former whip under the Harper government, and of course, former minister for what is now called Indigenous Affairs. Thank you so much for being with us, John.
Well, thank you very much, Nathan. I wish our technical problems quite as apparent, but I really enjoyed talking with you today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. We'll have you on again soon. Thank you. Well, that was our show for today. Apologies for the technical difficulties that did occur, but thank you for staying with us. And a special thank you, of course, to John for continuing to keep things rolling while we were getting things sorted on our end. I guess we'll end it there. There's a final point I'd like to make, and I suppose that is that, again, coming back to what does the future of conservatism hold, and what's going to happen when it comes to the lockdowns and all the rest of it. And for that matter, the format we had today, actually, if you'd like to comment or send us a message about the format today, we did our first kind of, wasn't quite Tucker Carlson, was it? We didn't have guests interspersed throughout it, but we did do kind of the long form and some commentary on news and live chat. So let us know if that format worked for you. But as just a final point, again, thank you for tuning in, and let us all hope that we're headed towards brighter shores and a more sensible future, especially for the conservative movement and for people's freedom in Canada. Thank you so much for watching.